Okay, so thank you everyone so much for coming. It's great to see you all here, especially in this weird time. It's really lovely to be able to host an event virtually, even though we can't meet up in person. And I'm delighted to welcome our patron, Dr. Alan Jamieson, here today. He's a deep sea biologist and a world-leading and recognised scientist who's had some pretty great experiences, which he'll tell us about in the world's deep sea. But he'll also tell us about how far the extent of our plastic waste has actually reached. A lot of times we don't think about the plastic that we throw away and how it could possibly end up in somewhere as extreme and remote as our deep seas. But hopefully he can shed some light on how interconnected our world is and how our actions do impact every corner of our planet. I think that the topic of plastic pollution is especially important in this time. We've seen increased use of single-use PPE, and sadly we've seen that as a new type of marine litter which has been washed up on the world's beaches. So I think that it's really important that we think about how we use the plastic that we have and how we can make it into a more reusable and sustainable alternative. We have produced to date over 9 billion tons of plastic. That's the same amount as plastic as 25,000 Empire State Buildings worth of plastic. So if you can imagine the mass of all those Empire State Buildings of plastic, that's how much plastic we have produced over the last 100 years since its creation. And about 12 million tons of that plastic enters our oceans every single year and has devastating impacts there, not only for our oceans, but for our own health as well. And so there's loads we can do to tackle that. And I'd really like to welcome Dr. Alan Jamieson to tell us more about his experiences and research finding plastic in the deepest points of every ocean.
Right, okay, so I'm Alan Jamieson. I'm part of Newcastle University and more recently a spin-out company called Armit Associates. So some of the work we do is related to just exploration of the deep sea. Some of it's very academic, a lot of it is very marine biology focused, but within that we've over the years taken opportunities to look into marine plastics and other anthropogenic contaminants, because the places we go are so weird. You just have to do things like that to get a full extent of what's going on. So for those not so familiar with the deep sea, people quite often ask me, why should people care about the deep sea? And the simple answer is it's most of the planet. 70% of planet Earth is deep sea, and if you look at that picture there's no funny projection on that. That's just turning the globe to the Pacific Ocean, and you can see half of it's already ocean. And if you take an average from the top of Mount Everest to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, most of planet Earth is nearly 4,000 meters underwater. So even though it might not feel like it's got an emotional attachment to an everyday human life, it's obviously massively, massively important to the planet as a single ecosystem. So 1.3 billion cubic kilometers of water. It's got to be important, right? So most of planet Earth is deep sea. Going down through the water column, we have this graph here. I won't do many graphs today, but this is a graph where you're looking at the red line being the sea surface. Everything above that is how much of the percent of the Earth is above the sea surface, and those bars are how much of per 1,000 meters below. So technically the deep sea starts at that blue line, right? So most of the planet's already deep sea. Deep sea is supposed to start at 200 meters. On average, the average altitude of land is only 800 meters, yet the average deep sea is about 4,000. But where we normally work is much deeper than that. So we tend to work at least 4,000 meters underwater. So if you look at the percentage of the Earth which is accounted for at 4, 5, and 6,000 meters, it's 54% of the planet. And if you ask anybody what happens at 4, 5, 6,000 meters underwater, most people will have no idea. And you've just written off half the planet. I don't know. It's deep. It's weird. It's got nothing to do with me, so it's not my problem. Unfortunately, now it is. Just to get some terminologies, this bottom part is the deepest point where it's 6,000 to 11,000 meters are made up of big deep trenches, like the Mariana Trench is the one that most people know, and I'll talk about that today. But terminology-wise, we call the deep sea from 200 meters to 3,000, we call it the bathyal. From 3 to 6,000 meters, we call it abyssal, and deeper than that, we call it hadal. So if I refer to hadal, I just mean it's ridiculously deep. Now, what's this got to do with plastic? it's a long, convoluted story, but I've tried to simplify it a little bit. Most of the planet is deep sea. Where do the energy from? What sustains that 70% of the planet? And it's energy derived from the surface. It's this globe here. That heat map you're seeing is chlorophyll and what we call surface productivity. It's plankton. It's spring blooms. Where it's red, it means it's really productive in the water. And eventually, all that stuff has to die. It sinks. Some of it's all year round, some of it's seasonal, but it's basically using photosynthesis from our sun, creating organic matter, and that will fall in the form of either dead plankton, dead whales, dead jellies, dead whatever. And all that organic matter comes down, and we call that marine snow. And that's what feeds the planet, what's on the surface. So we end up with a situation where, if you imagine that red line, what that looks like if you were to walk it, you would end up with something like that. You go down on a basin, walk along the South Atlantic and back up the other side. Now what's happening is all this marine snow, all this organic matter is slowly sinking down. By the time it gets to deep sea, there's not much left. There's only about 1% of what was on the surface reaches the very deep sea floor. But that's it. That simple little diagram is largely the mechanics of how 70% of the planet work. Problem now is, what happens if you throw stuff into that, right? So you've got surface-derived food is now being mixed with pollution. It's being mixed with plastic. We're not even going to talk about the effects of climate change and also ocean acidification on the quality of that food. This is just stuff we've added to it. So you have that surface to sea floor pipeline is now contaminated with plastic and various other things. So these things haven't been around long enough for deep sea animals to have evolved some sort of detection mechanism. It doesn't know what plastic is. None of these animals will have any idea what these things are. They're far too new. These animals have been around for hundreds of millions of years. Plastic's been around for about 70. So unfortunately, we're basically spiking the dinner. Now, life history of plastic. This is a weird one. So if you look from the top down, you have this really horrid picture of lots and lots of plastic being accumulated in some harbour somewhere, and in classic sort of beer ring pools floating in the midwater. Then you've got these nurdles and so on and so on. But obviously, an object goes into the water column, goes in the water surface, for example, and it starts floating around. UV radiation will start to break it down, make it harder and harder, and eventually start to fragment. It'll start to sink. Quite often it will just start to suspend, because when marine growth starts to grow in it, it makes it heavier and it will find neutral buoyancy somewhere. So a piece of plastic might be found floating around at 400 meters under the surface or whatever. Over time, it's going to break down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. Then it starts getting suspended within the water, starts to sink more, and ultimately you end up with chemical contamination as well, because I'll talk more about this later. You get a lot of chemicals that will actually bond to the plastic. So in that earlier stage, you have a lot of consumption and entanglement problems, which you see a lot of on the news about whales and dolphins with their stomachs full of plastic, and turtles with the plastic rings around their necks and stuff like that. It's very conspicuous. It's horrific to see. But then when you get down to the smaller sizes and the chemical contamination, you have full-on consumption and biomagnification and bioaccumulation and burial, and these things which are less obvious. We don't see them so much. You don't get a shock factor, but it's there. And it's one of these silent ones. Of course, during the life history of this plastic, you're looking at things sink. Plastic's never going to evaporate. It's never just going to jump into space and zip off out the solar system. It's only ever going to go down. So you have this weird relationship between the visibility of the problem, where that I have no idea what the story is behind this kid in that photo, but when you see that, it's probably the biggest shock factor. But actually, the extent of that type of scenario is actually very small. They're very limited to like harbors and river systems and things like that. But as you go down towards the chemical contamination, visibility is almost none, but the extent of that will be astronomical. So a strange relationship there. So deepest point in the Indian Ocean, there's a carrier bag right there. There's something what's probably some sort of plastic. It's certainly not organic, certainly not geological. That was the deepest point in the Indian Ocean. Deepest point on Earth, there were probably 3 or 4 different pieces of plastic, but this particular coil of wire went way off into the horizon. There could have been hundreds and hundreds of meters of that. Not sure what that was from. And 8,000 meters in the Mariana Trench, we were just sitting watching the fish come past, and then all of a sudden this weird thing came in, and we sort of spent a bit of time looking at it, thinking, what kind of animal is that? It doesn't really make any sense. It wasn't. It was just a piece of plastic floating past the land at 8,000 meters in the Mariana, right bang in the middle of the Pacific. Also, Puerto Rico Trench, there's a photograph there of what looks to be like some sort of oil drum. In the floor of the Arctic, we found quite a lot of tarpaulins, lots of little cups, and I don't know, maybe it's cruise liner debris or something, I don't know. But It's quite surprising when you think how remote that area is. In Puerto Rico, we have Coke cans, beer bottles, magazines, gates, just about anything you can imagine. So when I was saying before about visibility versus extent, that's the big stuff you see with the sub. That shows you that there's impact, that there is a presence there. You go in a bit further and look at the microplastics. So we took these tiny little amphipods from 7, 8, 9, and 10,000 meters from 6 trenches spanning the northeast, the northwest, and the southeast Pacific. Of all the ones we did this work in Newcastle, and of all the samples we did, 72% had at least one fibre in their guts. And when I say a fibre in a gut, it doesn't sound much, but it's, when you look at the size of the animal, it's kind of like a human swallowing a metre-long plastic rope. You know, it's really quite gross. There were some places, the cleanest, if you like, the cleanest trench was New Hebrides off New Caledonia, and the worst one was actually the Mariana Trench, where we found that every single animal had at least one plastic fibre in its gut. And it's quite often, one of them had 8, which was quite frightening. The weirdest thing about all this is we took it down to Milton Keynes to a guy called Bob, which you should always have a guy called Bob on your projects. And he did this thing called FTIR analysis, where you burn the sample and it tells you what type of plastic it is and where it came from. And what we found was pretty much all of the carbon and nitrogen bonds had shifted. And that's kind of indicative that these things are old and very, very badly degraded. But we got a reasonable match against the databases, and a lot of them were lyocell, they were rame, they were nylon 12, things like that. And that's actually quite frightening, because what it seems to be is a lot of the stuff we were finding from all over the Western Pacific were first generation textile synthetics. And when I say first generation, I mean it's things from the 70s. Now that means all that stuff in the North Pacific garbage patch hasn't sunk yet. There isn't any new stuff there yet. So everything we've put in, all these big numbers and all these big statistics that we know that we've done over the last 10, 20 years, that stuff perhaps hasn't quite got to the bottom yet. So that we're still looking at a lag between what's on the surface and what's on the bottom. Take one step further than that, you look at persistent organic pollutants, in particular PCBs, which are plasticizers, things that were used in the 50s and 60s with hydraulic oils and computer parts and things like that. And then you've got the first generation flame retardants. These were substances that we made, which were awful. I mean, they're up there with CFCs, just really horrible stuff. They were never dumped to the sea, but they were accidentally released in the environment in various cases, and there were insufficient incinerations and things like that. And they were found to be what's called persistent, which I think should be more like permanent. Produced 1.3 million tons of them, were banned in the 70s, but they don't go anywhere. So everybody on the Zoom call has PCBs in them. Unfortunately, we're already all polluted with them. They're called persistent because they don't go anywhere. So if you see in that diagram there that, you know, if plankton absorb one, fish comes along, eats 3 plankton, it takes its 3 PCBs. Fish comes along, eats that big fish takes a small fish's 3 PCBs, so on. They pass from one to another. So over a course of our lifetime, we accumulate more and more PCBs. The only way for a human being to lose PCBs is to give them to their babies through breast milk. That's how tragic this whole thing is. But they don't exist in nature in any way, shape, or form. So it does give you something you can use as a tracer. They're also hydrophobic, which is important. Hydrophobic means that they don't like water. So if there's something in the water, they will bond to it. Now, we've already talked about 2 things in water: marine snow and plastic. So, and where does that go? It goes straight down into the deep sea. So these things bond to marine snow, but they love plastic. Persistent organic pollutants will stick to plastic like a magnet. So the plastic is a mechanism to transport something else horrible to deep water. So we looked at the Mariana Trench and the Kermadec Trench. Kermadec is off New Zealand. So you've got Mariana in the North Pacific, Kermadec in the South Pacific. To make it a bit more robust, we did 7, 8, 9, 10,000 meters. We did 2 different species of amphipod, and we tested for PCBs and PBDEs. The PBDE data I've not put up because there's only so many graphs you can take on Friday night. But what I'm showing up there is the PCBs. And the first thing to notice is every single sample had PCBs. It doesn't matter what level. It doesn't matter if it's high or low. There isn't a single 0 value on any of those. So that's sad in itself. The top graph is the Mariana Trench, and those values are astronomically high. That's the bottom line. The Kermadec values are bad. The ones at the top are really, really bad. They were coming out, some of the amphipods there were showing PCB levels 15 times higher than some of the most polluted rivers in China, which have been famed for productions of persistent organic pollutants. That's how bad it is. And basically the story is, every time you throw something in the sea, if it's thrown in for a river, eventually the river will flush. If you stop it at the source, stop the pollution at the source, the river will eventually at some point flush it all out. Once it's in open ocean, it can disperse. Some of it can get washed back and all the rest of it. Once it sinks and gets to the deep sea, there's nowhere else for it to go. It can't go anywhere. You're only going to collect more. So this problem will never get better. This problem will only ever get worse. So this is why we think about Challenger Deep in the bottom of the Mariana Trench as being this pristine, extreme, last frontier, the place where no man has gone before and all that nonsense. And you get there and find it's one of the baddest, the worst polluted places in the ocean. So there's also recent studies coming out that you can detect the radioisotope from the hydrogen bomb testing in the 60s. You can detect those levels within the animals as well, which is really sad. So yeah, so we're looking at this situation where we have visible big items of litter on the seafloor. If most of the stuff we saw in the deep sea doesn't really care about the big items, there's nothing, we didn't see any evidence of any interaction between animals and big stuff. But again, it's one of those ones that it's more of symbolic of human folly more than anything. The microfiber stuff, obviously everything so far we've found has microfiber problems, but you can argue that a lot of these animals eat anything. They chomp through sediment all the time, so who cares? Maybe they just eat a bit of plastic and poop it out the other end. It doesn't really matter. Some animals it does matter to, and some it doesn't. What does matter is that fibre will then be coated in PCBs. Those PCBs then get into the animal. So even if the animal ingests and gets rid of that piece of plastic, in that process of digestion, it's taking the PCBs. And what the PCBs do is reduce your ability to reproduce. It doesn't make you sterile, but it reduces the viability. So over time, your population will be less and less successful. The problem is, the deeper you go, the less and less you know about what the populations were supposed to be. So in conclusion, we have at least 12 of the deepest places on the planet, including all the deepest point in all 5 oceans and both poles. Every single location, except perhaps Tonga, had visible signs of plastic litter, regardless of how depth or regardless of how close it was to the shore. And microfiber ingestion and persistent organic pollutant contamination was very high levels in all of them. And remember, these places are remote. Some of these places are hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from the nearest city. So what we're trying to conclude, or what we can conclude, is pretty much nowhere in the oceans is unreachable by sinking plastic. And I'm still frustrated when even just last week or the week before, who knows, lockdown's weird, but there was another press release came out on the news about someone had found all this plastic in the Mediterranean at a staggering 2,000 meters deep, as if, I don't see how it can be a surprise anymore. This stuff is just everywhere, and there shouldn't be, I can't see how there could be anywhere that doesn't have evidence of plastic in it. For us, I think the saddest thing is that the window that we had to study some of these animals alive is gone, because we're discovering new species that already have plastic in it. So someone says, okay, so it reduces their reproductive success. How much has it been reduced by? It says, well, we don't know. We don't know what. You can't go back 60 years and study these things and come back and say, okay, the population has dropped by 20%. We can't do that. That amphipod there is an example of something we did a few months back. We named the new species Plasticus because it's never been found before. Humans have never even seen this before, and we found plastic in its guts. I'll leave you with one last thought about it's not all doom and gloom. There are things going on and really kick off in the next year, certainly over the next 5-10 years. And one of the ones I'm involved in is this guy, Andrew Forrest, in Minderoo, in Australia. He's a head of the Walk Free Foundation and various other amazing enterprises, but his new one is going to be to try and tidy up the ocean. So he's already suggested this new way of putting a levy, a volunteer levy on creating new plastics for industry. So he's already got the likes of Unilever and Coca-Cola, and some of these enormous big corporations have now said, you know, they will look into using recycled plastics rather than bringing new plastics, because at the moment it's cheaper to make new than it is to recycle. And that's something he really wants to change, and he's actually putting literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of his own money into this to try and kick it off. Because like Andrew always points out, plastic is an amazing substance. It gets a really bad rap, but it's actually brilliant, as long as it's kept within the economy and it doesn't end up in the environment. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to make sure that we don't end up casting stuff off anymore. There's a value to it, and if you look at your recycle bin at the end of the week and you look into it, you don't see a recycle bin full of plastic. You see about 20 quid sitting there. That's ultimately where you have to go, is to change these things into monetary value. So there is hope. There are people doing a lot, and he's just one of many who are putting a lot of investment into trying to address this. And so I'll conclude there and have a chat about it all. And I'll just take the opportunity to thank Amy and the Another Way for an invitation to talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alan. I'm sure everyone will agree with me that was pretty awe-inspiring, and will have provoked a lot of thought about how far our plastic really does go. for me, seeing the footage of all those organisms at 6,000 meters below our oceans is extraordinary, and just shows that, you know, we don't want to damage all these things before we have even discovered what they are. So I'm going to have a look at Slido for everyone's questions. And if you have any more questions that you want to submit, feel free to do that now. Okay, so I'm going to go to the first question, which is for Alan. It is, why can't thermoset plastics be recycled?
There are like 3 different ways of recycling. One is you chemically break it down, one is mechanically you break it down, and the other one is thermally you break it down. And depending on the type of plastic, depends on which one of those you can do. You need someone who works in recycling to answer that, I think. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Tristan has asked some questions about microplastics in our oceans. He says, what movement, if any, is there towards a worldwide ban on the use of non-biodegradable microbeads?
I thought we were heading towards that anyway. I thought that we were pretty much there, and certainly in this country. But I think there are 2 things that are coming up which I think they're a problem in themselves, but I think it's the fact that they've become a problem is more symptomatic that of all the bad things we've done in the past, I've introduced something and then a period of time later went, oh, that's really stupid, let's not do that anymore. You would like to think those days were over, right? And then of course then the microbead stuff came out and someone's like, who thought this was a good idea? You know, this was very recent. And then there's new stuff where you see silver nanoparticles being put into socks and deodorants and things, because silver is antibacterial. So lots of products are advertising silver nanoparticles. The problem with the silver nanoparticles is they get washed down the sink and they end up in the sewage works. The sewage work only works because of bacteria. So if you stick a whole bunch of antibacterial substances in the sewage works, then you've got other issues. And nobody seems to be thinking that far ahead. So there are problems in themselves, but there are also problems as to how they manage to arise at all. And why isn't there a system in place where anything which is designed to go down the sink, surely people think beyond the plug hole, but apparently not. It's bizarre.
Thank you. How much research is being done to discover the impact that fungi and bacteria can have on degrading ocean plastics?
Loads, lots and lots. Even at Newcastle. So a colleague of mine, Grant Burgess, he's very interested in this. A lot of people want to find plastic reducing bacteria. You already got hydrocarbon reducing bacteria, you got sulfur reducing, there's normally bacteria for everything. There just isn't really an obvious bacteria for plastic yet, because plastic's far too new. It's just far too new. Everything else has been around for millions of years. But what I know Grant has done is I think he's sequencing or growing as many different bizarre strains of bacteria as he can and just culturing them on all sorts of different types of plastic and just leaving it. And he hopes that one day when he comes in his office, there will be a big hole where these things are finally eating their way through. Because at the moment, they're very difficult of any other way to do it other than trial and error and just throw loads of stuff at it. But they've certainly been down beachcombing and looking at the types of bacteria that live on stuff that's clearly been in the sea for a long time, because it's difficult to simulate that in the lab. If you get a brand new piece of plastic, like a water bottle, to degrade that, to try and make it feel like it was 10 years old and has been attacked by ocean bacteria for 10 years, it's very difficult. So I know they are going around beachcombing and taking samples of those to see if there's a particular strain that favours the old plastics.
What are the likely successful technological solutions to the plastic problem? We've had that quite a few times.
I'd be quite cynical about this. I'll be brutally honest as well. I think there's nothing you can do about it except for stop putting more in. If you listen to the things that Andrew Forrest talks about, and keeping all, don't stop using plastic. Plastic's brilliant. Just don't let it out of the economy. Keep it within your homes. Keep it within your industries. Don't let it out, and then keep it where it has value. Don't waste it where it becomes not only of no value, it eventually costs you somewhere else down the line. Now, in terms of getting it out the sea, it's just ridiculous. You're never going to comb the sea surface, even let alone go subsurface. I mean, how do you take out a trillion microscopic plastic fibres out of the sea without destroying every living thing? And so I think it's one of those things you're just going to have to live with it. The big thing now is when you look at the statistics of the volumes of plastic coming out of major river systems a day, that's where you need to concentrate. Is don't let it get out. Don't let it get into the sea in the first place.
Yeah, I think personally that's in a way a positive message, because it shows that we have complete control, us as a human race, over the plastic that gets into our oceans, because it's the plastic that we're using in our everyday lives and in business and corporations, and the plastic that we buy from the supermarket, and the plastic that we put down the drains and that we wash in our clothing comes out as microfibres. So there's a huge amount that we as individuals can do to prevent that plastic getting in the rivers and the watercourses and the oceans in the first place.
Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's to not be tempted to go down the all plastics are really bad route. It's to not be wasteful at all. And I think it's really odd where you have this recent sort of campaign against single-use plastics, like a piece of plastic used 2 or 3 times is better. I mean, it should be any plastic that goes in the sea, whether it's been used once or whatever. So I think we need to not take a sort of low-hanging fruit, easy way to satisfy ourselves by saying, well, I don't use single-use plastics anymore, so that's me sorted.
What methods do you use to collect and analyze marine samples for the purpose of developing new theories?
Ooh. So yeah, we use the landers like I showed. So those are great for big mobile animals. Trapping animals in deep sea is very difficult, because if you've spent as a species 100 million years in complete darkness, you don't have a hiding instinct. So you're not really going to climb into a trap because you've never come across a thing before. You've always just been in the dark. So we used the video to record them. The small little amphipods we used, the little traps, those are made from about 2 or 3 parts we normally source from B&Q. It's really high-tech stuff. Of course, then there's the submarine, but the real trick is not always in the collection. Once they're on deck, it's getting them. If you're working Mariana, for example, the surface water will be about 28 degrees. Those samples those animals, when they're alive, were down at 1.5 degrees. So once the vehicle comes up, they start to cook essentially in the water. So in terms of methods and techniques, is trying to get them off the vehicles and get them chilled and get them frozen or get them preserved as fast as possible, because then you have a better chance of getting really high quality DNA sequencing, some of the molecular cellular stuff. And the microplastic stuff's really difficult in itself, because you've got to go through almost a forensic police level of contamination control, because the last thing you want to do is find that there's orange and red microfibers in all your samples and realize that day you were wearing an orange and red fleece. So it's not as easy as just pulling them open and looking for microplastics. It has to be done in a very, very controlled way.
Are we consuming plastic every time we eat fish?
Probably. No, actually, no. I think every fish will have it in it, but you don't eat its guts and its digestive system. If you do, you're weird.
Might there be the chance that the pollutants in the fish, though, we are eating, if they're in its muscle?
Well, that gets tested all the time. So there are I've lived in Aberdeen 20 years and used to work a lot with an organisation called Marine Scotland, and they send people up to the fish markets in Peterhead, I think it's twice a week, and they're constantly taking samples, looking for levels of mercury, looking for levels of parasites. I'm pretty sure they'll be doing microplastic tests already. So that if it gets to the supermarket, it's passed the test. It won't creep in as some sort of dirty fish. There are lots of regulations on food standards in this country.
Presumably, seafood like shellfish, like mussels, because we eat the entire organism, then if it does have microplastics in its gut, we will be consuming it? Yeah.
Yep. You also probably breathe in a hell of a lot of microplastics when you sleep at night as well. When you think about the sort of lint, if you look in your tumble dryer and look at the amount of small plastic fibres and they just come out of your clothes.
I'm going to ask a few more questions, but when it gets to 8 o'clock, I'll have to sum up, and we will be publishing questions that we haven't been able to answer on our social media, so that Alan and I can answer them after the event on social media, so you can look at the answers there if we don't manage to answer all your questions. Does it take less energy to recycle plastic than create new virgin plastic?
I guess it probably depends what type of plastic, what country you're in, and what infrastructure they have. But as far as I'm aware, recycling does require a lot of energy, and I think people don't necessarily realize that. It's like when you take I always think this when you go to the bottle bank and you put your glass and you feel really good about yourself because you've recycled your bottles. But think of the energy it takes to melt glass. Think the heat you need to generate to melt that down and make it into something else. It's not necessarily probably greener than other ways, but I don't think there's any solution to this which is you could say is really truly 100% green. But I think that is part of the problem now. I mean, the virgin plastics come from the oil and gas industry, and they're selling this stuff, and they're obviously selling it to primary manufacturers because they're not wanting to pay for recycled stuff. So presumably it's cheaper to get it at source than it is to recycle it.
Yeah, the message from me there would be that if we all reduce the amount of virgin plastics that we are consuming, then we're going to reduce the carbon footprint of our lifestyles too. So they go hand in hand, because ultimately when we buy virgin plastics, we're going to be pulling out fossil fuels from the ocean. So until we have that circular economy where all the plastics that we use can be reused and recycled, then it's better for us as individuals to just reduce the amount we consume every day, because then we'll be helping to reduce the amount of virgin plastics that are produced.
I think like solutions like the shops that you have now, where you just take your own container to the shop. Mm. If you scale it up by 6 to 8 million people in the UK, you know, if you just do the math, like, you've got to keep reminding yourself there are 68 million people just in the UK. If each person in the UK does something to reduce their plastic consumption by 1 kilogram, you do the math. It's huge.
Yeah, it is huge, and I think that's the power of the individual. A lot of people think, well, what's one plastic water bottle? What difference is that going to make? But actually, that could be the plastic water bottle that ends up at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. And if every single person in the world went in with the attitude that we can actually solve this, and that our everyday actions do make a difference, then we can make a huge impact. Can you liken your deep sea experiences with any earthly one, or is there simply nothing comparable?
Any earthly experiences? It's like a traveller from a different planet. No, there's nothing quite like it. I mean, it is super weird. I mean, I don't know what would be the equivalent on land, other than maybe a hot air balloon or something like that, flying a plane. No, it is weird, and it's as I say, it's probably a more wonderful experience in hindsight than it is at the time, because it is horribly uncomfortable, and a lot of things are going through your head at the time. So, you know, I think there's been quite a few dives where I've been on where I've sort of taken a moment to think, I should actually enjoy this. Like, stop fidgeting and just, you know, stop being all science about it and just enjoy it. So, but yeah, I'm not sure there's any equivalent, but it's very bizarre, and I'm very privileged to have had a go in it.
When do you predict that plastic waste currently suspended in the ocean will fall to the deep sea?
I think it'll be quite a long time. So, marine snow, we found out there's lots of estimates of how to calculate how long does it take marine snow to get from the surface to the bottom. Unfortunately for everybody involved, but fortunately for the guys doing these calculations, when Fukushima power station blew up, they had a beautiful, beautiful radioisotopic tracer introduced onto the surface, and they tracked that down. So from the marine snow that was contaminated with cesium-139, from the surface to the 7,000 meters took 65 days. That's pretty fast. Now, that stuff does sink. The thing with plastic is that plastic spends most plastics are buoyant, so they all spend a huge amount of time floating around on the surface. So it's not a case of throw it in the sea and how long does it take to sink. It's pretty much how long does it take to become neutrally buoyant, and then how long does it take to become negatively buoyant. And in that, you've got this UV action that's drying out all the hydrocarbons. You've got wave action, which is constantly smashing this stuff up. And then to move from positive to negatively buoyant, you've probably aided more in bacterial growth and like goose barnacles and all that kind of stuff that ends up sticking to it. It has a mass. So you get this weird relationship where plastic bottle floats around, it creates a biofilm, the biofilm creates habitat for goose barnacles, and after a while the goose barnacles are using it as a raft, and they'll have a great vantage point to filter feed, but they'll filter feed so much they'll get too fat, and then they'll sink the bottle, and then the bottle will come down, it'll go too deep, kill the goose barnacles, they'll probably fall off and it'll go back up again. So you might find that if you could follow the life cycle of a plastic bottle, it could be, I don't know, that's hard to say, months, years, who knows. So the point is, it's a very complicated question.
Yeah. How can we be sure what is happening to the plastic we think we are recycling?
So that's one for the economics and politicians. So one of the things that the Mendeley Foundation did right at the start of their interest in plastic was trying to work out where all the plastic's going, where it's coming from. And one of their conclusions were the two countries in the world which pride themselves most on recycling are Japan and Germany. but then they recycle to almost obsessive compulsive disorder. It all goes on to barges and gets sent to Sri Lanka, who they then kick in the sea. So you think, what was the point? So it's not necessarily the statistics on who's doing recycling. It's statistics of who's doing recycling and where is it ending up. I mean, China recently used to take all the UK's plastic, and a lot of people wave the finger at the Asian countries and North Indian Ocean and stuff like that, but because it is particularly badly polluted with plastic, but it's not their plastic. That's the issue. So it's a global problem, and it crosses a lot of boundaries and crosses nations, and it's very, very political.
I think currently putting something in the recycling bin does not at all guarantee that it's going to be recycled, because it has to undergo so many different processes and it's transported so many different places. I visited Cumbria Waste last year to have a look at all the plastic that is being recycled in Cumbria, and it was just astonishing to see the amount of plastic that was in that warehouse, just collected from one day and produced by just a few towns and villages, and tons of that plastic can't be recycled because it's been contaminated with plastics and polymers that can't be recycled. So it's not at all guaranteed, and even if it does get sent to recycling centres, it might be rejected if it's got a certain contamination level, and it might be shipped halfway around the world and then end up in garbage patches, as Alan mentioned, in countries like Sri Lanka and Indonesia, where they're seeing huge devastation to their own livelihoods because of plastic pollution.
I think it's like the microbead thing is nobody thinks beyond the plug hole. When it comes to recycling, so well, I do recycling, so it's fine. Well, maybe not, because the stuff you're putting in your wheelie bin might be swimming off Sri Lanka right now, and that's the problem, is not being able to see the whole life history of it.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to close the questions there, but as I said, if there have been any that haven't been answered, we will post them on our social media so that they can be answered afterwards. Thank you so much, Alan. You've been really shed light on all these issues, and I'm sure everyone's really enjoyed listening to you today. From Another Way, we'd just like to say that there are so many things that you can do as individuals to get involved in the solution to plastic pollution. We've just launched our 30 Steps to Another Way campaign on our social media. You may have seen it. And it's just gone live on our website as well. So we've been posting ideas every week on what you can do as a household to live a more sustainable lifestyle, which includes reducing the plastic that you use and reducing your carbon footprint as well. And so if you are interested in taking steps yourself, then you can visit our website, just search Another Way, and you can find the 30 steps to follow. And they're just in bits of advice every week, and then you can complete checklists and then get a certificate to become an Another Way home. So it'd be great to see some of you having a go at that too. There are a couple of leaflets on our website as well on reducing your plastic and your carbon footprint. So it's not all doom and gloom, as Alan said earlier. There is so much hope because there are so many great projects going on around the world, and it all starts in our homes as well, with the plastic that we bring home in our shopping every week, the plastic that we use in our bathrooms. So there's so much that we can do. So I'd love for you all to join us on the journey to becoming an Another Way home. I hope you've all really enjoyed the talk tonight. And if you do have any more questions following up, feel free to ask us on social media or drop us an email. And to finish, I'd just like to give Alan a round of applause if we can all unmute ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening. And
What happened, by the way? That's really quite bizarre.
yeah, I hope you all have a great evening, and please do continue to follow Another Way's projects in the future so that you can keep an eye out on events like these, and together we can find another way to live. So thank you very much, everyone.